I'm Jude Scott, and today we're going to paint a man's portrait using Holbein Watercolours. There'll be lots of tips and techniques along the way, and I hope that you're going to have a go and paint along with me. Maybe you've never painted a portrait before, but you'll be able to paint with me and see the colours that I use. There'll be lots of help given, and I hope that you enjoy it. Maybe at some stage you've always thought that you wanted to paint somebody in the family or a friend's portrait, so this might just get you started. Please leave a like if you do, and don't forget to subscribe and you'll be notified of any new videos coming out. Thanks very much. Let's get started. So you can see here that I have drawn up my portrait, but before we do that I'll show you a couple of things I use. That blue block is to wipe my brushes on. It's a car wash sponge. I've got some brushes here. I've got a calligraphy brush, the black one, another medium-sized one. I use a mechanical pencil, and I've also got a mechanical eraser which has a really nice end to it, and it allows you to be quite specific how you're rubbing out. The next thing I've got is the proportional dividers, which there's a lot of information about on proportional dividers, but it lets you get your drawing done to scale, and you can get a really exact drawing looking at your proportional divider, and it helps you place the face on the paper. I have used a lot of quite dark pencil lines for this drawing, mainly so that you can see it as you're watching. If I did it very light, you wouldn't be able to see. A couple of things that I like about doing drawings is I use my mechanical pencil rather to get very fine lines, and they rub out very easily on hot press paper. I'm using hot press paper, and you can get the pigments and the water to flow over the surface of the paper. The only thing is you have to really be careful that you don't have too many hard edges, but in this portrait I've deliberately left lots of hard edges, as you'll see as the portrait progresses. The colours that I use for the skin tone are very simple. It's Quinacridone Red in Holbein, and they're Aureolin Yellow, and it gives me just a very light, warm shade. This man was very tanned and had quite a weather-beaten skin, so he needs some quite strong colours. It was also, the photo was taken with lots of light, so there's lots of lights and darks on this face. So if you want a darker colour, for example where his throat is, just same colours, just less water. So far I've only used the two colours. My palette there is stained from Quinacridone Red, Quinacridone Ochre, so it's quite dark there. Now for the hair, it's in shadow on the hairline. I've used Mars Violet mixed with Cobalt Blue. So that takes me up to 4 colours used so far. So always adjust the amount of liquid that you've got in your brush. That's why I have that blue block there, which is a car wash sponge. Really, really helpful. And I'm just dragging those tones back into the hairline to replicate the light and shade in his hair. It's quite wet, the paint that I've used, so it will sit there for a little while on the top of the paper without giving me hard edges. But if you're using hot press paper, it will form hard edges much quicker than any other paper, so just watch your edges. I particularly like it because it does glide over the surface of the paper, and you can get some beautiful soft finishes for any subject that you're painting. You can also get some very hard edges if that's what you want, and lots of visual texture using hot press paper. This paper here is Fabriano, and it's really good. It's 300 gram. I always use 300 gram paper. Anything Less than that, I feel that you're wasting your money because it just won't give you the same results. And I always like to use paper from a paper from a full sheet, and that's like a sheet that's 76 by 56, because they definitely have a different quality to paper that you can buy in a pad. Pad paper is okay for sketching, but I think if you want to do a serious painting, use full sheets of paper and cut them up or tear them into the sizes that you want. Here I'm using just a bit of cobalt with a tiny little bit of Mars Violet, because I want those eyes to recede into the face. He's got quite a strong brow, and if I use a warm colour there, that'll come forward. So to make any object recede, even like far distant hills, anything like that, always use a cooler colour. So I have drawn the shadows in the face in quite dark, so you can see them there, and that sort of always gives me a map to use when I'm bringing that cooler, darker shadow down the face, or it might be a warmer shadow down the face. I think it's really helpful too to always change the temperature of the colour, the temperature of the tone. So if you're using, that's about a number 2.5, the tone that's on his face at the moment that I'm painting, drop in some warm and drop in some cool, just to sort of keep it interesting. Otherwise the face especially can look quite flat, and you'll find it difficult to get that look of 3 dimensions. So you can see now how painting the shadow under the nose, it has actually lifted that nose. It's starting now to look 3-dimensional. So I'm just going to run those shadows, the stronger tones, down the face. So this particular man has quite a strong beard shadow on his skin, but I don't have to do it as cool as his skin. I want to make it a little bit warmer. And those colours are blending really well on the paper for me. So again, I'm just mapping around the contours of the mouth with that paint. It looks very strong on the paper, but it will fade because I'm using quite a lot of water with the pigment. That will sink into the paper and it'll lighten a lot as it dries, probably about 20%. The other thing I think that's interesting is you can see how I've gone over the whites of the eyes. If he had teeth, I'd also go over those with the first wash, because teeth are never white and the whites of your eyes are never white. The eyes are always in a little bit of shadow from the brow, and the deeper set a person's eyes are, the darker the shadows are, the stronger the shadows are around their eyes and around the eye socket. So I'm just changing the temperature of that tone a little bit, putting a little bit of cooler in there, just under the mouth. And this photograph of this man had very strong light on the left side of his face, so I'm leaving that as almost white paper. It did have a first wash, which was a little bit of Aureolin Yellow and some raw Sienna or yellow ochre if you use yellow ochre. But in the Holbein colours, I really like the yellow ochre. I used to use the raw Sienna, but I find that the yellow ochre is not as opaque as raw sienna, but it really gives you lovely skin tones. So now I'm switching to a 1-inch flat brush, which I just want to lift off the side there to bring back some light to the side of the face. And that brush has a lovely edge, which will do that for me beautifully. So just getting another batch of skin tone mixed up. I just put a little bit of cobalt into that and a little bit of permanent rose. Okay, so the skin up there needs to go a little bit darker. And there's also a bit of a shadow there from his hair. And because he has like a lot of light in his face, sort of like sunlight, I want to exaggerate that and make his face look quite bright and colourful, as if he's standing in quite bright light. And you can see how that has faded right out. So I'm going in now with some more colour. Just mapping around under his face. More tone on the cheeks and under the eye. So whatever colours you put on the face, just think, you know, if you've got your master mix made up for the skin tones, do you want it to be warmer or cooler, lighter or darker? So just bringing that warm shadow down and merging it with Cobalt Blue just to cool that area off, and put in the darks for where his beard is. So this side of the face is cooler than the other side of the face, so I've got more blue tones with the skin tone, or cooler tones with the skin tones. I'm just lifting out some of that reflected light off the side of his face. And I'm dampening just under the hairline now, and I'll mix up some more skin coloured wash and restate the colours there. Just grey that off a little bit, don't want it too bright. So you can always adjust even your reds. You can go warmer or cooler just by adding some Cobalt Blue for the skin, and then if you want it warmer, just put a little bit more of Quinacridone Red in. Now you can see that I've put quite a bit of warmth into his face. He looks like he may have been a sailor, someone who spent a lot of time in the sun, so I wanted to put those bright colours into his face. I've made the skin merge with the hairline a little bit better, and I've put in the eyebrow. So to put the other eyebrow in, I had to actually edit that part of the movie because the sun was shining directly across. But I've pre-dampened the paper, and one of the things I love about Holbein paints and the other thing I love about hot press paper is if you pre-dampen the paper to put in something like eyebrows or hair or fur, you can get wonderful soft marks because the pigments just float across the top of the paper. It works really, really well. Again, just mixing up skin tones. You can see I don't use many colours. And I think the benefit of that is that you will always be able to know your colours and get the most out of them if you don't have lots and lots of different colours in your palette. Sometimes it's just too confusing. Now this is looking very, very bright in the video. It wasn't as bright as that, of course, when I was painting it, but the camera's picked up that red as being something that's super bright. But I can cool the red down with a little bit of Cobalt Blue, and I can always lift it off if it's still too dark when it dries. Now when you're putting layers of paint onto any subject, especially a portrait, you can add pigment to wet paint, or you can add pigment to dry paper. You can't add pigment whenever you paint watercolour to damp pigment because you'll end up with cauliflowers. Cauliflowers are when you get those hard-edged shapes that you wished you hadn't created. They look great if you're doing vegetation or maybe flowers, but if you've just put them into a face and you wanted a very smooth, maybe the curve of a cheek, and you get a cauliflower because you've put paint down when the paper underneath is still damp, you get very unhappy results. So if you want to know if your paper's dry, just touch it with the back of your fingers. The back of your fingers are far more sensitive than your fingertips, and if the paper is damp, it will feel cool in relation to if you put your fingers on the back of the paper where you haven't painted. So if you get that feeling, don't touch it until it's completely dry, or dry it off with a hairdryer. So now I'm just putting the shadow around this side of his nose, and you can see how that nose is really starting to come forward. So for the dark for his eyes, I'm just using Cobalt Blue and some Mars Violet and just mixing it up until I get it dark enough. If you put those marks down and they're like way too dark, that's okay, just blot them off gently with a piece of kitchen paper or a tissue. And they always say the eyes are the windows of the soul, and they certainly are. You'll see that this is starting to come to life, especially once I put the pupils in. Now the eyes are interesting because the top of the eye, directly under the top eyelid, is always darker than the eye above the bottom eyelid. So there's always shadow over the top part of the eye, from the eyebrow and just from the eyelid. So always make sure that the top of your iris is darker than the bottom of the iris. And when you're painting in the pupil, or when I'm drawing up the face, I always make sure that I leave a little square where the pupil is to remind me not to paint that in, because you'll never get the white of the eyes fresh as unpainted paper. So I always paint the pupil around that. So if you're waiting for one part of the face to dry, then it's a good idea to take that opportunity to put in some paint in other places. Just going to soften that edge there, link the two. Now just putting in the pupil, and you can see how the eye will just come to life. That needs to be made a little bit cooler, so I'll just put a little bit of Cobalt Blue in that, darken the nostrils, and that nose has really got a three-dimensional look to it now. Now the right eye, I can't touch that until that pupil dries. Otherwise the top of the iris and the pupil will all end up together, so I'll just have to leave that for a moment. So while that's happening, I'll paint in the ears. And sometimes when you look at somebody with the light behind them, or very strong light at the side, the colour of the ear is almost a red. So I always make the ears warmer than the face, and sometimes the tip of the nose or the whole nose might be much warmer. So it's always good just to think about that. But usually the forehead, the nose and the chin are quite warm. As well as the ears. There's a bit of shadow underneath that top lip, and the corners of the mouth are the second darkest part of the face. The darkest, of course, being the pupils. And he's got a shadow under his mouth, under the bottom lip. brush I'm using is a medium, one of my medium calligraphy brushes, and it has a beautiful point. So because this is only a very small portrait, I can paint pretty much the whole portrait just using the one brush, even the very fine areas, because I can get it to a really beautiful sharp point. You need a good brush if you want to paint, and I definitely prefer natural bristles. They hold more pigment and water, and they're far more responsive when you go to paint than synthetic bristles. So he's got quite a sharp cleft down that side of his face, and I want to make more of the shadows under his throat. Another reason to use the same paints, like restrict your palette. I think here I've used 4 paints so far, possibly 5. I've used Cobalt, Mars Violet, Quinacridone Red, Permanent Rose and Yellow Ochre, and some Aureolin Yellow. So that's 2, 4, 5 paints. Your whole painting will be harmonious if you have a restricted palette, and perhaps don't do something like introduce Viridian green or a very, very different colour, unless that's the effect that you want. You know, if you wanted to have a very bright painting, yes, fine to have lots of different colours, but if you're doing want something to look harmonious, restrict the colours in your palette that you're painting with. And repeat the colours, so you can't have, for example, the colours that I've got on his cheeks. I've repeated those colours in the shadows for the hair, in the depth of the hair. He's got the Cobalt Blue for his eyes, is also in his hair and on his chin, so everything looks harmonious. Now I want to just take off it's got a very gentle, hardly discernible light striking the top part of his lip, where it goes from being on the face to just curving under the mouth. So best way to do that is flip your paper upside down. This is an acrylic paintbrush with synthetic bristles, but it's absolutely brilliant for lifting off very fine details, as you can see there. And that just, again, gives his mouth the look of 3 dimensions. So to do any lifting off like that, wash your brush and dry it really well, and so that it's just damp. And Holbein paint will lift off beautifully. Even Holbein's staining colours will lift off really well. So I can paint another layer of wash over his chin because it's completely dry. And the same with the cheek. To get that curve of the cheek and the curve of the chin happening, the best way to do it is to wait till it's completely dry, like I have, and put your paint on in another layer, and it will work beautifully for you. It's actually very hot while I'm painting this portrait today, which is why I've had to take a section out of the video because the sun actually came through the window as the afternoon wore on and was streaming right across the painting, making it very hard for you guys to see. So another reason this little brush is great is I can actually lift out quite precise areas of white paint, or sorry, back to white paper, because it's got a nice sharp corner. I couldn't do that with a soft brush like I use for painting the rest of the painting. So I'm just restating the pupil there. And you can see how it makes the eye pop with that little bit of white. Okay, so what's next? Take time to stop and evaluate your painting. Sometimes if you've been sitting there for a long time, it's a great idea to get up, walk away and come back with fresh eyes. Go and have a cup of tea, because you can almost go painting blind. You just don't see things that they really are. And also very often it's a great idea if you have an issue with your painting and you think, I don't know what's wrong with it, why doesn't it look like I thought it should, get your camera or your phone, take a photo of your painting in black and white, and if you've got tonal issues, your painting will jump out at you and you think, I need to change the tones. Usually it's because the tones are too pale or you don't have enough dark tones. Most times it's because the darks aren't dark enough. So if you've got a painting that's all mid-toned, you'll find that it will look the same everywhere. What you really need is to have it same but different. So you need to have your darks really dark. So in any painting, it's good to have about 1/3 dark and 2/3 light, or if you've got a very dark painting, have 2/3 dark and 1/3 light. Always have it, in balance, like 1/3 and 2/3. Never have it 50-50, because again, that will be the same everywhere, and that's not what will make a good painting. So he's got a bit of a bow in the middle of his nose, so it's not actually dead straight. So I think that's done him justice. I'm just warming that up even more, because I know when that's dry, it will be much lighter. And always refer back to, keep constantly referring back to your image or the subject that you're painting. If you can't see the tones, screw your eyes up, almost shut, and have a look and see the difference. Really try and teach yourself to pick up the shapes of the dark shadows. And if you can paint the shadows, then you'll have the object. So if you're painting a nose, don't think about, this is a nose. Just think, where is the light and where is the dark? The same with ears or eyes or anything, look for the lights and darks and try and replicate those shapes in your painting, and it will come to life for you. Now this is just some Mars Violet and some Cobalt, which actually looks much darker than it is in reality on the video. And again, that pigment will just sort of skate across the surface of the paper and replicate the grey of the hair and look, you know, nice and soft. I started painting this yesterday and I had to give up because the sun was coming in the window and it was so hot, and it's starting to creep across the page as I'm finishing it this afternoon, so I'll have to paint as fast as I can. So underneath, or the lower part of the iris, I'm just lifting a little bit of pigment off there just to make it a little bit lighter in tone and a little bit of variation. So now I'm mixing up some cobalt and some yellow ochre, and I'm going to do the background. So because he's got such a warm face, I would always put a cool background. If someone's got very warm skin, you always put a cool background, and if they have very cool skin tones, put a warm background. And the other advantage of a cool background is, of course, it will take the background further back and it will make the face come forward. So I'm just feathering in the background into his hair so that it's not like a cutout, and adding water up here, making it a little bit lighter. So you can see that I've got already warm and cool areas in that background. Even though it's cool, some areas can be warmer, some can be darker, some can be lighter, some can be cooler. So always keep it a little bit interesting and break it up a little bit. So think light and dark, warm and cool, and you can't go wrong. And it's always a good idea to have lost and found edges. So on this side of his face we have got lost and found edges, and on the other side we've got lost and found edges with the hair. Lost and found edges, if you're not sure of what that means that your object or the subject that you've painted has areas that background merge into the foreground, and it gives your eye a rest as you look around the painting. Otherwise it's going to look like you've cut it out of a magazine and stuck it on a white piece of paper. So always just be mindful of that. So I think his background is finished. I'm just going to flick some water into that for a bit of texture. It's just something that I always love to do. Just plain water, and you'll get really interesting effects, especially on hot press paper, because it will push that damp pigment back on the paper and give you lovely little sort of spots. I'm just adding some cobalt mixed with a bit of whatever else I've had left, because I want to, where the collar of the t-shirt is, I just want to sort of strengthen that a bit. He's got folds in his clothing, and there we have the finished portrait for you. I hope you've enjoyed watching it, painting along with me, and I hope it inspires you to have a go and try painting for yourself. Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you do, and don't forget to subscribe, and then you'll get any new movies that I produce and you can see what's happening. Thanks for watching.